Hi folks, HR Funk here, back in front of the camera with my PSA rifle, or at least my PSA upper. And if you missed it, I previously did a detailed review of this rifle system. I'll attach a link in the description below and you can go back and take a look at that video if you want to. But I've been so impressed with the accuracy and consistency that I'm getting from this system. Most recently you saw this when I was shooting zombie targets with a red dot optic, that I've decided to use it as my optics testing bed. All of my other rifles are set up with optics for one specific purpose or another, and I'm loath to remove those optics and remount them. But with this one, I don't mind pulling the optic off and putting another one on and going back out to try it with some new optic. So after I finished that red dot video, I thought I am going to try this rifle with a scope that I have been wanting to test for a long time. This is the Hi-Lux XTC scope. This is the one that Hi-Lux Optics specifically designed for use in high-power rifle competitions. And this is the Generation 2 version of this scope, and I'm going to give you a close-up look and a detailed review of the optic itself. Then we're going to head out to the range and see how this combination performs together. In 2017, the Civilian Marksmanship Program made what was likely the most radical rule change in the history of that organization when they began to allow the use of rifle scopes in some of their service rifle competitions. Unfortunately, at the time, there were not many scopes that met the requirements of CMP's rules, among which was a requirement that the magnification of the scope could not exceed 4.5 power, and the scope's objective lens could not exceed a diameter of 34 millimeters. After that rule change, the first scope that I used in competition was a Hi-Lux CMR, which, while it met the requirement of the rules from CMP, lacked some features that I would have preferred in match shooting. Apparently the folks from Hi-Lux Optics felt the same way, and shortly after they came out with what I believe was either the first or one of the first rifle scopes designed from the ground up for use in CMP and NRA service rifle competitions. And that is the scope you see here in front of you. It is the Hi-Lux XTC 1:4x34, and as I said, it was designed to meet all of the rules and requirements for match shooting, and it also has some very desirable features that I'm going to be telling you about in this video. Hi-Lux based the design of the XTC scope on their CMR, and like the CMR, this is a 1:4 power rifle scope with a fast focus ocular lens. The XTC also has multi-coated optics and high-density extra-low dispersion lenses for a bright, sharp image when you look through the scope. The XTC has its reticle in the second focal plane, meaning the reticle stays the same size regardless of the magnification setting, and it also features an eye relief of 3 inches. The objective lens of the XTC is adjustable for parallax from 15 yards to infinity, and it's marked with indications at 100, 200, 300, and 600 yards for convenient use during match shooting. The power adjustment ring on the XTC turns smoothly, and it is also marked to indicate the magnification setting, and it comes with an extension that can take the place of this screw to make it even faster and easier to change your magnification setting. The XTC has an illuminated reticle that you can see here, and it looks much better to your eye than it looks in the camera view here, but I wanted to show you that it is illuminated. It has 10 brightness settings for the illumination, the first 3 of which are night vision settings, and the top setting is the highest illumination that you can use with the XTC. And I've tested this on a bright day, and I've got to say I typically do not use illumination during normal lighting conditions, but on that very bright day, the illumination was not extremely bright at the highest setting, but I was able to see the green reticle, and in those lighting conditions it was kind of impressive that I could see anything at all. So it is bright enough to be able to use on a bright day if you so desire. And those illumination settings are adjusted with the rheostat you see here, which also serves as a location for the XTC's 2032 battery, 2 of which accompany the scope when you purchase it new. The adjustment turrets of the XTC are calibrated in quarter-minute of angle settings, which is something I very much appreciate, especially in service rifle competition. I've said before, my brain is calibrated in minutes of angle, and I find this to be very easy to use, especially since the reticle, which I'll be discussing in detail in a few minutes, also is calibrated in minutes of angle. So these two work together to help you if you need to be able to adjust your sights one way or the other. And something that's done in service rifle competition is a lot of sight correction, both for wind and for distance. So we do a lot of clicking back and forth, and this is something I very much like. Also, this is the generation 2 of the XTC. The original XTC scope had brass internals for the mechanism. The generation 2 features stainless steel internals, so this is even more robust than the original scope, and so far I've found the adjustment settings to be very positive and very repeatable. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, the reticle in the XTC scope is calibrated in minutes of angle, but since this is a second focal power optic, the reticle is only properly regulated when the scope is at a maximum magnification setting of 4 power. At that setting, the cross in the middle of the reticle has a measurement of 5 minutes of angle from end to end of each arm. The inner diameter of the horseshoe is 10 minutes of angle, and each hash mark on the vertical and horizontal stadia line subtends a distance of 5 minutes of angle. There are also other measurements that can be taken with the various features in the reticle that are all outlined in the user's manual. When you purchase the XTC Gen 2 scope, it comes with 2 plastic flip-open scope covers, a manual, the extension arm that I mentioned attaches to the magnification adjustment ring, 2 batteries, an Allen wrench for resetting the adjustment turrets, and a lens cloth. And I don't want to wrap up this shop review without mentioning the mount that I'm using with the XTC scope. This is the UTG AccuSync cantilever mount with the quick release feature. Specifically, this is the 50mm cantilever mount set up for a 30mm scope tube, which is what the XTC has. This mount sells for about $80 on Optics Planet, and for that price I have been very impressed with this mount. It is very easy to install and to remove if necessary. I previously used this with a different scope, and after zeroing that scope, I removed and then reinstalled the mount, the scope obviously with the mount, and then shot another group, and after the initial zero and uninstalling and reinstalling the optic, I had about a 1.5 minute elevation deviation at a distance of 100 yards, which I didn't think was bad at all for a quick release mount in this price range. So I just finished zeroing my new scope, and my final shot during the zeroing process was this one, which looked pretty good. And I decided to fire a 3-shot group, and those 3 landed here, here, and here. So I managed to pull one just slightly off to the right, but I decided with these 3, that looks like a pretty good zero. So now I'm going to go back and test that UTG scope mount and see what happens when I remove it and replace it. So here we go, folks. I am going to remove the scope with this UTG quick release mount, or at least I'm going to try to. There we go. So it is now off the rifle. Now I'm going to replace it, being careful to get it right back in the same rail notches where it was. Now I'll try another group at this distance of 100 yards, and we'll see how it does. And it appears we did have a slight zero shift, mostly in elevation. If you recall, those last shots when I finished zeroing were all down in this area. These 3 are up here. So about maybe a 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes of angle shift in zero. So after arriving at the range, I zeroed the scope at a distance of 100 yards, which at the particular range I was using was the maximum distance I could go. And after I finished the chore of zeroing, I started to shoot some groups with different types of ammunition, and I started off with a 52 grain Hornady match bullet, and this is a hand load that I've used up at Camp Perry in the modern military rifle match. Now keep in mind, the PSA upper that I have with the Freedom barrel has a twist rate of 1 turn and 7 inches, which shouldn't work real well with these light 52 grain bullets. But for that first 3-shot group after zeroing, I have 2 shots that are in the X ring and 1 shot that's just low down into the 9 ring there, just missed the 10 ring with that one. And those 3 form a group of 1 1/4 minutes of angle. And something I found myself doing while I was aiming with the XTC scope is using the 5 minute of angle cross to center on the target, but also that 10 minute of angle horseshoe perfectly circled the aiming portion of the target, and I was able to use that as a second check and make sure that I had an equal distance around the circumference of the bullseye target as well as the cross in the center of the target. And I found myself doing that more and more as I shot, and I found it to be very helpful. So I think for high-power service rifle shooters, that's going to be a benefit, having that circle that basically gives you a second means to check the alignment of your scope before you start to press the trigger. Next, I switched over to a 55 grain Frontier match load, and with that, my first 3 shots went into a nice 3/4 inch group, just a little bit high. It printed a little higher than that hand load that I was using before. So I made a sight correction. I came down, I believe, 3/4 of a minute of angle, but by that time I started to get a left to right crosswind. And as you can see, that crosswind took me out into the edge of the 10 ring. I've got 1 shot down there that's in the 9 ring. The entire group here is just over an inch. That's about 1 1/8 inch group with that ammunition. And the best 4 out of that group are in about, looks like about 5/8 of an inch center to center. Hopefully you can see those okay. Try to move this around so you can see where the shot holes are. Moving on, I switched over to a 77 grain Federal gold medal match load. And with this group that you're about to see, I had 1 called flyer. I have it marked here. I saw the sight move or the scope move as I was pressing the trigger, and I knew that shot went off to the right before I ever finished the trigger press. After that, I managed to lock things down pretty well. And by the way, I was shooting these from a bench off the bipod with a rear bag. So I was not shooting these groups from a prone position off a sling or anything like that. But still battling that crosswind that I was talking about before, I ended up with 5 shots. This is actually 3 shots right here in the X ring and 2 shots right over here just touching the 10 ring. And those 5 shots came to 7/8 of an inch center to center with that 77 grain gold medal match load. So again, with just that 4-power optic and the PSA upper, I'm teetering right at minute of angle accuracy, and I was pretty happy about that. Next, just for fun, I switched over to some M193 ammunition, and I've mentioned in the past, this rifle does not like the M193. So with that M193 55 grain load, try to get this where you can see it, I ended up with a 2-inch group, so nothing terribly impressive. But then I switched back to that 52 grain hand load that I was talking about before, just to see if that first group was a fluke or if that was going to stay consistent with the accuracy. And again, with the 52 grain hand load, I ended up with a group that is 7/8 of an inch center to center right here. Now I should have taken note of the fact that these printed a little bit low because that's going to become significant in a few minutes. But again, sub-minute of angle accuracy with that load. And again, I hope you can see exactly where these shot holes are. So after I finished all this, I decided I wanted to try a box test. And I moved off the bench and went out and took a prone position and set everything up to fire a box test on a different target. And I'm going to grab a clean version of this target and tell you what I did. Then I'll show you the video footage of me doing it. So I conducted the box test from that distance of 100 yards, and again I was shooting from a prone position, And the idea behind the box test is to check the optic for accuracy in its adjustment clicks and also repeatability to see if after a lot of sight corrections it comes back to the same place that it started. And what I'm going to do when I shoot this test is fire all the rounds during the entire test at the center of this bullseye in the middle. The only thing that I'm going to do then is adjust my turrets to move the strike of the bullet to where they should land on the center of these other targets. So to begin the test from that distance of 100 yards, I'm going to fire a 3-shot group at the center of this target. Then I'm going to come up 10 clicks and left 10 clicks, which should put me in the center of this target. Once I've fired that 3-shot group, I will come down 19 clicks. Now, some of you might be saying 19 clicks, that doesn't sound right. It sounds like it should be 20. Since I'm calculating this in true minute of angle, not inch per 100 yards, the correct measurement is going to be 19 clicks down. Then I'll fire this 3-shot group, actually still all the while aiming at the center of this target. Then I will come right 19 clicks and fire this 3-shot group, then up 19 clicks and fire this 3-shot group. Then I will come left 10 clicks and down 10 clicks and see if my final 3-shot group is right in the same location as my first 3-shot group. So that's the description of the drill. This is what it looks like. And the first 3 away. Now it's time to come up 10 and right 10 and try 3 more, maintaining that same point of aim. Now go down 19. And try 3 more. Again, same point of aim. Now left 19. And 3 more. And up 19. And 3 more. Now go left 10. And down 10. Went 1 click too many on my windage. Okay, I thought I miscounted and I did. So now these 3 should be right on top of the first 3. There we go, folks. I can't see any of them through the 4-power scope. Time to go down range and see how this XTC scope did. And here is that target you just saw in the range footage. And something I want to mention at the outset here in discussing this target is if you look closely in the range footage of me shooting, you will note that I do not have my spotting scope next to me. So there was no funny business going on here where I would look in the scope and maybe give an extra click one way or the other or anything else. I did not know where these shots were landing until I walked down range to see. Since I was using just the 4-power optic of the XTC scope, all I could see was generally these targets, but I could not see the impact of the shots. So I fired out my first 3-shot group right here, and this is a ½ minute of angle group center to center to start out with. So started out smoking hot in terms of accuracy, but you note that it printed a little bit low. And this is why I said a little while ago when I had that one target that I should have taken note of the fact that this ammunition, and by the way, this again is that 52 grain hand load that I was talking about, and it's printing right here at the bottom of this circle, which I didn't know. And I wish I had known that, because when I first walked up to the target, I looked at this and I was kind of disappointed. I thought, wow, that doesn't look very good at all as far as the tracking for this scope. But the more I examined this target and the more I analyzed it, the more and more impressed I am with the performance of the XTC, and I'll explain why. The fact that this group printed low indicates that all of the groups that I'm going to be shooting are going to print low. So I have to start my measurement from the center of this group, not the center of the target. When I walked up, my first thought was I was aiming at the center of the target and I saw all these groups were low, and this is actually where the bullets were striking. This is the 0, if you will, for the scope. When I measured this with a ruler, it came out to exactly 2.5 inches and 2.5 inches. Now you note I have a bad shot on these 2 targets, and this was me. The way I know this was me is because they are in the exact same place. If I superimposed this target on top of this target, these 2 shots would almost be touching, which tells me whatever I was doing wrong, I was doing it consistently wrong, at least. But the fact that they were both the first shot that I fired suggests to me that after I made my sight correction and came down 19 clicks from this group to this group, I didn't get quite back behind the rifle or didn't get it seated into my shoulder quite well enough or what have you, and that just caused both of these shots to go low and to the right. So the true center of these groups is the center of these 2 shots. And when we look at that, and I calculate that 2.5 inches up and 2.5 inches left, it comes to right here, which is more or less right between these two shots. Then I came down 19 clicks. I've got this flyer, which again was the first shot, but 19 clicks puts me right here in terms of the elevation. And again, I've got these two shots, windage wise, are perfect, and the measurement with the scope correction is exactly where it should be. Then I came right 19 clicks and fired this group. I pulled this shot a little bit low, but I'm doing a little bit better here. I didn't have one of these extreme flyers, and fired this group, and this is the exact measurement where those should hit, and it's basically the exact center of that 3-shot group. Up 19 clicks, which comes to right here, and that basically puts me exactly in the center of that 3-shot group. Then left 10 clicks and down 10 clicks. Again, I pulled that first shot low, but these two are right with the first 3-shot group that I fired. This entire 6-shot group is 1 1/4 inches center to center. The first group here is ½ minute of angle. This one was 3/4 minute of angle. And with a 4-power optic firing at that distance, I am not upset with a 1 1/4 minute group. In fact, when I calculate all of these groups in terms of average group size, even taking into account these flyers, I had a ½ inch group, a 2½ inch group, a 1 3/4 inch group. This is right at 1 inch center to center. This is 3/4 inch center to center, and then this 3/4 inch center to center group. It comes out to 1.125, 1 1/8 inch on average, center to center at this distance of 100 yards, which mathematically calculates to 1.07 minutes of angle. Now, I want to say that again, not 1.7, but the average for all of these groups is 1.07 minutes of angle with that 4-power optic from 100 yards. So again, the tracking was extremely precise. It brought me right back into where I started, and the only bad things that you see on here were a result of some bad shots that I fired. So that was where I called it quits on that day. I came back home, I cleaned the rifle, but I did not touch the scope. And a few days later, I went back out, and this time I wanted to try a different test. I wanted to set up again at 100 yards, but this time I was going to be using a standard NRA 100 yard service rifle target and using my spotting scope, and trying to see, when using the spotting scope, just how accurately I could keep this system with the XTC scope and the PSA upper, adjusting for any deviation that I saw in wind or elevation or what have you. So taking into account those groups that I had shot the last time around were all a little bit low, I made a sight correction to begin with of 3/4 minute of angle that I added to my elevation. And again, firing from a prone position at that distance of 100 yard, I began to shoot at my 100 yard service rifle target. Now, the problem that I had here is the fact that I started my target camera, but in the process of setting everything up and getting ready and everything else, I forgot to start the camera aimed at me. So it was supposed to be another section of video where you would see a split screen with me and the target, and there were different times that I was talking while I was shooting, thinking that the camera was recording everything, and of course it didn't. So what I've done, I've got the footage of the impacts of the bullet on the target, and I've gone back and done a voiceover telling you what I was doing and any corrections that I made and anything else as I was shooting, and here's what that looks like. So as I said, when I got to the range, I set everything up at 100 yards, and I added 3/4 minute of angle to my elevation setting. And when I looked through the spotting scope and saw shot number 1 was at 8 o'clock in the X-ring, I decided I wasn't going to change a thing. I was very happy to see that there to begin with. I thought that was a great way to start things off. I was getting a full value right to left crosswind of about 5 or 6 miles an hour and getting some gusts in there. And I didn't want to risk a windage correction based on that first shot in case the wind died down and took me out the other side of the X-ring. When I fired shot number 2, I looked at the spotting scope and again saw that at 10 o'clock in the X-ring, and I thought, as long as I'm shooting X's, I'm not changing a thing. So I lined everything up and got ready for shot number 3. And when I fired off shot number 3, which is coming momentarily, it hit almost dead center in the X-ring. It's actually touching the top of the X, and those 3 shots together are forming probably a half-minute of angle group center to center, maybe even slightly smaller than that. So again, very happy, and that's why I didn't make a windage correction. And on shot number 4, I think I caught a gust, and that took me just outside the X-ring right there at about 10 o'clock or 10:30 probably. So on that one, I decided I didn't want to make a windage correction yet. I wanted to wait and see what shot number 5 was going to look like. So I lined everything up for shot number 5 and squeezed it off. And shot number 5 is an X. It just touched the X-ring at about 11 o'clock. And based on that, I decided I was going to make a windage correction. So at that point, I came right, half a minute of angle, and I could probably have come down at least a quarter minute or maybe a half minute, but based on the entire group at this point, I really didn't want to make an elevation adjustment. So after making my half minute of correction to the right, I lined up for shot number 6 and squeezed it off. And shot number 6 was back in the X-ring, and that one is about 11 o'clock in the X-ring. And again, as long as I'm shooting X's, I'm not changing a thing. So I lined up for shot number 7. And if you look at the vegetation behind the target, you can see it moving. That tells you kind of what the wind is doing. And shot number 7 was another X right at 11 o'clock or maybe 11:30 at this point. And again, as long as I'm shooting X's, I'm not changing anything. And that 7-shot group is still sub-minute of angle. So I lined up for shot number 8. And as I squeeze that one off, that's why I didn't make a windage correction. Had I come another half minute or so to the right, that would have gone out the other side of the X-ring. As it was, shot number 8 is another X. The group might be a little bit bigger. Nah, maybe not. That's probably close to a 1 minute of angle group center to center there, even with the windage correction. And shot number 9 was right back with the original group, right about 11 o'clock. Another X, and as long as I'm shooting X's, I wasn't going to change a thing for shot number 10. So after checking that in the spotting scope, I lined up again and squeezed off the final shot of the group. And that one is at about 12:30, another X. And I could tell through the spotting scope that was going to be a very, very good score. And when I walked down range and looked at this target, I was extremely happy. And here's that 100-yard target, folks. In fact, I might have to frame this thing. That is a true 109X score that I fired on this target. And I should have probably come down half minute of angle, but really I thought as long as I'm shooting X's, I'm not going to touch anything. So I did make that one windage correction, but otherwise I left everything alone. So at this point, the only thing I still wanted to do with this system was test it at longer distances than 100 yards. And for that, I had to wait until just a couple of days ago when I was at a different range. And the way things went on this particular day, I was in a huge hurry. So I had no time. You're going to see there's no footage of me shooting. I got there, I set up the target camera, I ran back to 200 yards, dropped down. There was no spotting scope, no mat. I was on the ground. You're going to see that it was snowing. And I fired 2 shots from 200 yards. And again, with the 4-power optic, I had no idea where I was hitting. So I fired those 2 shots. I went down range and I saw the shots that you're going to see here in a moment. Then I went back to 300 yards, made a sight correction from 300 yards, and I fired a 3-shot group from back there. And this is what the 200-yard portion of that looked like. And here are those shots from 200 yards, and I was pretty happy when I got downrange and saw where those hit. I had no idea when I squeezed them off. Again, as I said, I was in a hurry, and I just fired these 2 shots, grabbed everything, ran back down range, and these two shots are within about an inch of each other, center to center. One shot was on the heart, one shot was just below the heart. And one nice thing with that 5 minute of angle cross is this target, the scoring portion of the target at least, measures 12 inches from side to side. So I was centering that 5 minute of angle cross, which at a distance of 200 yards equals 10 inches, just where either arm or the end of either arm was about an inch inside of the white outline, and it was very easy to keep my shots centered using that. When I got back to 300 yards, it wasn't quite as easy because now that 5 minutes of angle at 300 yards measures 15 inches, so the cross was a little bit larger than the target, and I was also getting some more snow falling when I was back there that was obscuring. As you'll notice, it's a white target with white snow falling in a day when the lighting was not that great to begin with, so I was dealing with some issues when I got back to 300 yards, but very happy with the 200 yard shooting. When I got back to 300 yards, here's what things looked like there. And here are the 300 yard shots marked with the red stickers. And those 3 shots from 300 yards came in at right about 4 inches, so about 1 1/3 minutes of angle from that distance of 300 yards. With a 4-power optic, under the conditions I was shooting in, I wasn't all that upset. The only thing that bothered me is that these shots were low. And it wasn't until I was driving home from the range that I realized what I had not taken into consideration when I made my sight correction from the 200 yard setting to the 300 yard setting. And that's the fact that the temperature on the day that I was shooting this target was at least 20 degrees colder than it was when I shot the last time when I was doing the box test. A 20-degree variance in temperature will make about a 1 minute of angle difference in elevation when you're precision shooting. If the temperature is 20 degrees higher, all else being equal now, humidity and everything else, if only the temperature varies, and it's 20 degrees hotter, it will raise your point of impact about 1 minute of angle. If it's 20 degrees cooler, it will drop your point of impact about 1 minute of angle. And humidity has a similar effect. Now, where I live in Ohio, usually the temperature and the humidity will cancel each other out. When the temperature goes up, the humidity usually comes down and vice versa. But on this particular day, with the snow, it was damp, it was cold, and all that combined to lower my point of impact about 1 minute of angle, almost exactly 1 minute of angle, as I'll show you here momentarily. So again, a mistake on my part that caused the group to hit a little bit lower than it should have, but the group size really is not bad, and considering this is a 300 yard target that I fired under those conditions, I'm not too upset with this at all. And had it been a better day and I would have been able to see the impact of my shots and correct for them, I would have definitely raised that. Again, when I was shooting from 300 yards, I could not see where the bullets were impacting, obviously. But I decided to come up before I left the 300 yard line and fire a headshot. Now, from 300 yards, it was very difficult to see the head of this target through the snow with the light and everything else. So what I decided to do was use my horizontal stadia in the reticle, and the outside of this bullseye to the outside of this bullseye is just slightly more than 15 inches, which is exactly the subtension of that horizontal stadia line from 300 yards. So I held exactly where that stadia line was in the center of these two bullseyes and went right through the center of each bullseye and fired this shot. And if I would draw a line right here, this shot is almost exactly 3 inches low, i.e. 1 minute of angle low from that distance of 300 yards. Again, as a result of not calculating for my environmental conditions on that day. Even so, if I'm shooting at this bad guy from a distance of 300 yards, he's still going to be having a very, very bad day. So folks, if you've stuck with me through this entire video, thank you. I've got to wrap things up by saying I could not be more impressed with the Hi-Lux XTC scope or this PSA upper that continues to impress me. Something I haven't mentioned, I don't think, is the fact that through all of the different conditions and all the different types of ammunition and everything else that I have run through this rifle, I have never had a malfunction attributable to the rifle itself. I did have one failure to feed that was a result of a magazine problem, but the rifle itself has been drop dead reliable. And the other thing I'll say is I may well have found my new rifle system for the modern military match up at CMP next year. But for now, that's going to do it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off anything you purchase from Optics Planet. Also remember the discount code from Hot Munitions. If you go to Hot Munitions, you can use my discount code there, which is HRFUNK10. That'll save you 10% off your purchase from Hot Munitions. See you next time, folks. Until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.